On January 15, 1947, Elizabeth Short's dead body was found in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Lima Park. The first person who reported the horrific sight was a mother, Betty Bersinger, out for a walk at 10 a.m. with her 3-year-old child. According to her, the way her body was posed made her think that the corpse was initially a mannequin. However, with a closer look, it revealed that the true scene was a horrendous crime, where the body was cut in half. 22-year-old Elizabeth had been sliced in two at the waist and completely drained of blood. On January 9, 1947, 5 days before her murder, Elizabeth returned to her home in Los Angeles after a quick trip down south to San Diego. She was with a guy named Robert Manley, a 25-year-old that she was reportedly dating at the time, although he was married. Robert told the police that after he picked her up from her house on January 8th, he took her to the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA. She was seen there by hotel staff talking on a payphone. However, people say that they saw her at the Crown Gill Cocktail Lounge that evening, about half a mile away from the Biltmore Hotel. When she was found, some of her organs, such as her intestines, had been removed and, oddly enough, placed in a neat pile underneath her buttocks. Pieces of her flesh had been cut away from her thighs and breasts. Her stomach was full of feces, leading individuals to believe that she had been forced to consume them before she was murdered. However, we are only getting started at just how horrific this crime was. The killer had sliced each side of her face from the corners of her mouth to the ears, creating what's known as the Glasgow smile, which was used as a torture method by Scotland's early gangs. It was interesting to discover that the body had been washed clean. Therefore, the detectives of Los Angeles Police Department came to the conclusion that she had to have been killed elsewhere before being dumped in the park. The detectives noted a heel print near her body and a cement sack with traces of blood that had presumably been used to transport her body to the vacant lot. The LAPD reached out to the FBI to help identify the body by searching their fingerprint database. Elizabeth's fingerprints turned up quickly because she had applied for a job as a clerk at the commissary U.S. Army Camp Cook in California back in 1943. Her prints then turned up a second round due to her arrest in Santa Barbara for underage drinking. Just 7 months after she had applied for the job, the FBI had her mugshot from her arrest, which they provided to the press. The media began reporting every detail they could discover. Phoebe Short, her mum, learnt of her daughter's death in a horrible way. The Los Angeles Examiner telephoned her pretending that her daughter had won a beauty contest. They had Phoebe speak about Elizabeth in detail before they revealed that she had been murdered, including the unspeakable way she had been dismembered. The media have different ways of portraying people, and the more they learned about Elizabeth, the more they could broadcast, and eventually they began to label her as a sexual deviant. A police report read, "This victim knew at least 50 men at the time of her death, and at least 25 men had seen her in the last 60 days before her death. She was known as a teaser of men." At this point, Elizabeth was named the Black Dahlia due to information of her wearing a lot of sheer black clothing. However, people started to spread false rumors about her being a prostitute, while others claimed that she liked to tease men because she was a lesbian. Elizabeth was reportedly a Hollywood hopeful. She had moved to LA just 6 months before her death and worked as a waitress, had no known acting jobs, and her death became her one claim to fame. The police had a hard time trying to figure out who could have committed this act. However, the media played a key part in this and ended up having received a few clues. On January 21st, 6 days after the body was found, the Examiner, specifically James Richardson, received a call from a person claiming to be the murderer. He said he would be sending Elizabeth's belongings in the mail as proof. The Examiner received a package with her birth certificate, photos, business cards, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen on the cover. Included was a letter pasted together from newspaper and magazine letter clippings that read, "Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers, here is Dahlia's belongings, a letter to follow." The same day they received a handbag. A black suede shoe was reported to have been seen in a garbage can, just a short distance from where her body was discovered. All these items were wiped down with gasoline, leaving no fingerprints behind to identify the sender. However, a partial fingerprint was found on the envelope. It was damaged in transport and never analysed. On January 26th, another letter arrived. The handwritten note read, "Here it is. Turning in wed January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger. The letter included a location. Police waited at the time and place, but the author never showed. The alleged killer sent a note made of letters cut and pasted from magazines to the Examiner that said, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." Curiously enough, it had been worked with gasoline as well, so no fingerprints, again, could be lifted. At a point in the case, the LAPD had 750 investigators on the case and interviewed more than 150 potential suspects that linked to the Black Dahlia killing. Officers had heard more than 60 confessions during the start of the investigation, but none of them were considered legitimate. From this point, there were 500 confessions, none of which led to anyone being charged. City Councilman Lloyd David even offered $10,000 as a reward for anyone with information regarding the case. The case was going cold. Many people assumed that the murder was a date gone wrong, or she ran into a stranger with a sinister agenda late at night while walking home. By mid-February 1947, the LAPD served a search warrant to the University of Southern California Medical School. They requested a complete list of students at the time of the murder based on the suspicion that the killer might be a doctor or a surgeon, but this didn't lead to any arrests or suspects. It's now been 77 years since her murder, and since the case went cold. However, people don't stop coming up with theories, and some of them are just chilling. After the death of his father in 1999, retired LAPD detective Steve Hodel went through his father's belongings when he noticed 2 photos of women who strikingly resembled Elizabeth. After making this discovery, he used his skills he had learned as a policeman to investigate his deceased father. Steve went through newspaper archives and witness interviews from the case, and even filed a Freedom of Information Act to obtain FBI files on the Black Dahlia murder. He had a handwritten expert compare samples of his father's writing to the writing on some of the notes sent to the press from the alleged killer. The analysis, strangely enough, found a strong possibility that the handwriting was a match, but the results were not conclusive. On the gruesome side of the murder, the crime scene photo showed Elizabeth's body had been cut in a manner consistent with a hemicorporectomy, a medical procedure that slices the body beneath the lumbar spine. Steve's father had been a doctor who attended medical school while this procedure was being taught in the 1930s. On top of this, Steve searched his father's archives at UCLA, finding a folder full of receipts for contracting work on his childhood home. There was a receipt dated a few days before the murder for a large bag of concrete, the same size and brand as a concrete bag found near her body. At the time Steve started his investigation, majority of the police officers who worked on the case at the time had passed away. However, he carefully reconstructed conversations these officers had about the case. He compiled all his evidence into a book, which became the bestseller in 2003. The book was fact-checked, and LA Times columnist Steve Lopez requested official police files from the case and made an important discovery. As we know, after the murder, the police had interviewed hundreds of people who had either confessed or were in interest, but no one was charged. However, it turned out that the LAPD had 6 main suspects, and George Hodel, Steve Hodel's father, was on their list. It was such a serious case point that the police had bugged his home in 1950 so that they could monitor his activities. Much of the audio was undecipherable, but one part was chilling. It said, 8:25 p.m., woman screamed again. It should be noted the woman not heard before the scream. The same day, George Hodel was overheard telling someone, "Realised there was nothing I could do, put a pillow over her head and cover her with a blanket. Get a taxi. Expired around 12:59. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, not that they may have figured it out. Killed her." He continued, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." Shockingly, after this outburst of new information, which supported his killing of Elizabeth Short and supposedly his secretary, the case remained open. This didn't stop Steve Hodel from continuing his investigation. He said he found details from dozens of other murders that could possibly be connected to his father, implicating him not only as the Black Dahlia killer, but as a serial killer. His research had garnered attention from law enforcement. In 2004, Stephen Kay, the head deputy of LA County District Attorney Office, said that if George Hodel was still alive, he would have enough to indict him for the Elizabeth Short murder. In 2017, a British author, Eatwell, announced that she had solved the case and published her findings in a book called The Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up America's Greatest Unsolved Murder. She claimed the culprit was Leslie Dillon, a man who the police had considered a prime suspect but ultimately let go. However, she claimed that there was much more to the case besides the killer. According to Eatwell, Leslie, who worked as a bellhop, murdered Elizabeth at the behest of Mark Hansen, a local nightclub and movie theatre owner who worked with Leslie. Even though Mark was let go, it is strange because he was actually the owner of the address book that had been mailed to the Examiner. He later claimed that he had given the address book to Elizabeth as a gift. Elizabeth had reportedly stayed with him a few nights, and he was one of the last people reported to have spoken with her before her death in a phone call on January 8th. Eatwell alleges that Mark was infatuated with Elizabeth and came on to her, though she rebuffed his advances. He supposedly called Leslie Dillon to take care of her. Mark seemed to know what Leslie was capable of, but didn't know how far he could go. Previously, Leslie Dillon had worked as a mortician's assistant, where he could have potentially learned how to bleed a body dry. Eatwell discovered from police records that Leslie knew details about the crime that had not been released to the public. One detail was that Short had a tattoo of a rose on her thigh, which had been cut out and shoved inside her genitals. Leslie claimed to be an aspiring crime writer and told authorities that he was writing a book about the Dahlia case, which never actually materialized. Despite all the evidence pointing to him, Leslie was never charged with the crime. Eatwell claims that he was released due to Mark Hansen's ties to some of the cops at the LAPD. While Eatwell believes the department was corrupt to begin with, she also thinks that Hansen contributed largely to its corruption to exploiting his ties to certain officers. Another discovery was a crime scene found at a local motel. During her research, Eatwell came across a report by Astor Motel owner Henry Hoffman. The Astor Motel was a small 10-cabin facility near the University of Southern California. On the morning of January 15, 1947, he opened the door to one of the cabins and found the room covered in blood and fecal matter. In another cabin, he discovered that someone had left a bundle of women's clothes wrapped up in a brown paper bag, which was also stained with blood. Instead of reporting the crime, Hoffman simply cleaned it up. He had been arrested 4 days earlier for beating his wife and didn't want to risk another run-in with the police. Eatwell believes that was the motel where Elizabeth Short was murdered. Eyewitness reports, though baseless, claimed that a woman who resembled Short was seen at the motel shortly before the murder. Her theories have not been proven, as we know that everyone involved in the case are most likely deceased, and many of the official documents remain locked away in vaults. However, she was adamant with her findings and truly believes that she had solved the mysterious case. At this point, it still remains unsolved. But what do you guys think?